So, I've been playing Starfield for about a month now, and I've sunk around 20-ish hours into the game so far, and I wanted to come back on this channel after my last video where I said I wasn't too excited about the game coming out, and I wanted to give my full, complete thoughts on it now. Just a quick disclaimer though, this is a review, but it is not me saying that you should go out and buy this game or you shouldn't go out and buy this game. If you want to go out and buy this game, you frankly should not listen to anyone's review but your own. That's just my opinion on that. But that being said, let's get into the video. I wasn't super excited for this game to come out in the months leading up to release, and that was pretty much the theme of my last video. And I felt like the hype train for the game got a little out of control, and I was disappointed with some of the news that we learned about the game. Like how we learned that only 100 out of 1,000 of the planets will actually contain life. That was a bit of a bummer for me. But now, in hindsight, actually spending 20 hours in the game, you really don't notice it that much, and I don't think it's that big of a deal, and I think people are overreacting to that part of the game. What really upsets me though is that Starfield is locked to 30 FPS on Xbox consoles, which I think is really inexcusable for a AAA game released in 2023. And to me, that's the most indicting thing about Starfield's launch, is launching in a state where you can only play at maximum 30 FPS on even an Xbox Series X. But limiting performance of a game on console and on PC is not something that only Bethesda is guilty of doing. This year alone, we've had several games like The Last of Us Part 1 on PC and Star Wars Jedi Survivor come out, and they're released in a state where they're struggling to be played on even the most recent PC hardware. It's clear that Starfield is no exception to this, as many players on PC are complaining about crashes, frame rate drops, and an amount of bugs you would expect from a modern Bethesda game in 2023. Now, I myself don't have the latest graphics card or CPU in my main system, but I can usually have a pretty pleasant gaming experience in just about any game that I choose. Having an RTX 3080, a Ryzen 7 7800 X3D with 64 gigs of DDR5 RAM allows me to be somewhat picky when tuning up my game's graphics. I usually aim for my games to have at least a solid 60 FPS at 1440p on high settings. That to me is a acceptable and an enjoyable modern AAA gaming experience. But in Starfield, I often struggle to meet this benchmark, especially in areas like New Atlantis and Sidonia, where there's a lot of assets and interiors and things that have to be accounted for, and it ends up being a real struggle for a lot of PCs to even maintain consistent FPS. And I really got concerned when I remembered that a lot of people have a lot less capable hardware in their system than I do. Even Xbox Series X players are reporting that their FPS can sometimes drop to lower than 20 FPS. That is completely unacceptable for people who've paid for not only a $500 console, but $70 for your game as well. Not to mention the fact that Xbox players just frankly deserve better from Microsoft in terms of their exclusive game lineup that they've been provided up to this point. I mean, the absolute bare minimum you could do in 2023 is release the game in a state where you could play it at a solid, consistent, stable 60 FPS. So yeah, when Todd Howard says we did optimize Starfield and you may need to upgrade your PC, it feels like a form of gaslighting on the community that Bethesda was trying to sell their game to. I will say that in terms of bugs and glitches, Starfield is probably the cleanest release I've seen from Bethesda yet. I did get the occasional crash here and there and a few anomalies, but for the most part my game wasn't overly plagued by bugs or glitches, so that's definitely a positive. In terms of graphics, the game is nothing special. I mean, it is Bethesda's best looking game yet, although that's true for basically every other AAA developer's most recent release. Though some of the textures they used for assets in the game looked a lot less detailed than others, particularly on the planets where you could tell procedural generation was the name of the game. We also knew that people would draw comparisons between Starfield and The Outer Worlds, and I found myself in that category of fans as well. A lot of the assets, like the chests and lockers and containers that you see in Starfield, remind me a lot of the ones that I encountered in The Outer Worlds. The visual style of both games definitely seemed a little more similar than I initially thought at certain times in the game as well. One thing that I found odd was how cold and soulless the eyes of the NPCs are. I'm not sure if that was intentional or not, but it seems like the voice actors were challenged to sound emotional and sincere, while the mocap actors were instructed to stare at you unblinking like an absent-minded frog. Moving on to gameplay, I was overall satisfied with Starfield. Starfield's FPS combat is fun enough to be engaging despite the fact that even on the hardest of difficulties, combat is a cakewalk most of the time. I remember I was fighting legendary enemies that were 5, 10, sometimes even 15 levels above me, and it still took almost no effort to kill them. And 80% of the enemies that were my level or below were just a simple one-shot kill. Although, what the game lacks in terms of difficulty, it makes up for with creativity, where FPS combat is concerned. Rather than go up against consistently hard enemies, I would find myself changing my approach to a combat encounter to keep things fresh. Sometimes I would only allow myself to use pistols in a fight, or try to only get headshots. Other times I would just plant myself on a good vantage point and mow down enemies with a minigun. Or I would use my Star Wars force powers to stop gravity and watch enemies ragdoll into walls, which can be pretty funny sometimes, I'll admit. So while the FPS combat in Starfield is not complex, it's open-ended enough to where the player has several different ways they can approach an encounter. The ship combat is another story entirely. This is where the heavy criticism of Starfield comes in. The ship combat in Starfield has the highest barrier to entry in terms of difficulty that I've ever seen in a Bethesda game. If you have more than 3 ships fighting you and you still have a Class A or B ship, you're most likely gonna die. Enemy ships can track you with such ease and drain your shield in no time flat. The way that the game suggests to get rid of enemy lock-ons that have been placed on your ship is to use your booster and just hightail it out of there, but this isn't a solution in most cases, as you're going to be fighting multiple ships at once most of the time, and your booster only lasts a few seconds, but then takes 15 to 20 seconds to recharge. That's not a sufficient defensive mechanic to put in the game to have decent ship combat. And a lot of Starfield fans have been saying that this is a skill issue. You need to invest in your skill tree, in the tech tree as well. You need to have crew members on your ship that have the valuable high-tier ship-based skills. But if you add all that together, that just seems to me like Bethesda just did a poor job balancing the ship combat. I mean, just ask yourself the question, why is the FPS combat so much easier than the ship combat? Why is it not even comparable in terms of difficulty? You could take starter weapons that you find in Starfield and continue using them for 15 to 20 levels and still not even feel a significant difficulty increase in the FPS combat. But the ship combat, forget about it. Unless you have a near endgame level ship, it seems, then you are going to get swamped and you are going to die very, very often. It seems like this part of the game just wasn't as well thought out as it should have been, and it definitely needed more time in the oven on Bethesda's part. When the two modes of combat, the FPS combat and the ship combat, are so different in terms of difficulty, it makes zero sense within the context of the game. Space combat that is accessible in terms of difficulty shouldn't be limited to those who only have 3 or 4 tier level skills and that have a C-class ship. I mean, I had an upgraded Razor Leaf. It was only an A class, but I would consider it to be good enough to where I would be able to have basic ship combat and not constantly die all the time. I felt like I was in boss fights just fighting regular ships sometimes. So yeah, I feel like that area of the game could definitely be improved upon. On a related topic, I really did enjoy the ship customization that's present in the game. Being able to swap a couple of new engines or cabins in the game really made me get invested in ship crafting and sinking tons of credits into making my dream ship. Well, not my dream ship, after all, you can't customize the interior of your ship basically at all, other than putting a few cabins and modules on top of it, which is a bummer, but hopefully modders will work their usual magic with that feature and will be able to customize their ships further in the future. As far as exploration is concerned in Starfield, there's some good stuff here, but not really that different from what I expected it would be like. You fast travel to a planet, or on a planet, and you use your scanner to find nearby points of interest in the area that you spawn into. Along the way, you can scan the planet's resources, flora, fauna, and even notable geological characteristics. I will say, mining for materials with the cutter tool feels really tedious and is just straight up not fun a lot of the time. But Bethesda games, particularly Fallout 4, that also had a lot of resource management, they do have this grindy aspect to the game where you just need to grind for resources for hours and hours on end. Speaking of resource management, Starfield's inventory system and overall UI needs work. It feels clunky and awkward to use, and it never feels like items are going to the correct place. And I can't quite put my finger on it, but for some reason, I never enjoy weeding out my inventory like I did in a Fallout or an Elder Scrolls game. I just feel like Bethesda should have workshopped the UI a little bit more before pushing it into production. Also, your inventory fills up super fast in Starfield. I was really surprised with how fast I filled mine up. I think my starting max carry weight was only 130 kilograms, and that filled up within basically the first hour of gameplay, and I was really shocked to see how easy it was to get encumbered. But I'll commend Bethesda for at least allowing you to move at the same speed as when you're unencumbered, but you have other negative things that happen where you can no longer fast travel, which is usual for these types of games, and you use up oxygen faster as well. I think that's an improvement on only being limited to walking speed when you're carrying too much stuff. Lastly, I wanted to bring up the game's story, and oh boy, I really didn't care for the main quest line in Starfield at all. To be clear, this isn't to say that I think the story is good or bad, it's fine. I just literally simply don't care about it. I found myself getting far more interested and enthralled with just exploring unknown star systems, encountering random NPCs, or doing one of the many side quests in the game. I think the faction side quests are actually much more interesting than the main quest line and are written really well in comparison. But hey, that's just me. I have always wanted to be a space pirate since I saw Treasure Planet when I was a kid, so maybe I'm biased. Go Crimson Fleet. I just found the whole Constellation plot and the entire main quest line and all the characters involved in it to be really boring and honestly pretty unconvincing in what they had to say. I just flat out didn't care about what they were talking about or what they had to tell me most of the time. And I don't really care that you end up getting kind of special abilities like you did in Skyrim when you were the Dragonborn. That to me just made it all the more clear that Bethesda pretty much just copied their own story structure and plot elements yet again. I don't know. Maybe I'm just too old at this point and I've gotten sick of the Bethesda game formula. The plot of the main quest line felt really predictable and overall I was disappointed with it. Quick side note, I really didn't care for the companions that you could have in the game either. I did at least like Samco, but that's only because he's the voice actor that also plays Adam Jensen from Deus Ex, so I thought that was pretty cool, and every time he spoke I was just like, Jensen. But the rest of them, I didn't enjoy spending time with all that much. Sarah feels unrelatable, so it was hard for me to connect with her. Barrett has his funny bone permanently switched to on, so it feels like he never takes anything seriously, which gets old after a few hours that you spend with him. And I'll be honest, I thought that Andrea was a badass, but ultimately was pretty forgettable. The companions being written like this really felt out of place in a game like this too. It's not like Bethesda has never had experience in making good companions before. I really enjoyed all the companions that you had in Fallout 4 and in Skyrim. And in those games, they didn't feel super convincing, but they were at least convincing enough to the point that I thought they were real people and I believe what they had to say. While in Starfield, it seems like you're choosing your traveling buddies from a small pool of stiff robots. I know it seems like that I don't like Starfield based off of the criticism that I've given so far in this video, but the opposite is true. I really do enjoy it. There is a reason why I've spent over 20 hours in the game so far. There is a reason why I'm excited to go back to the game even now. But it doesn't help anybody in this community by pretending this game is perfect, and it also doesn't help anybody in this community by pretending this game is a total failure either. Starfield is basically what I expected it to be. Good, but not great. And I just wanted to come and give my honest thoughts about Starfield and say that even though that there are a lot of things wrong with it, I'm still having a great time with it. And I feel like what's important to realize with games like Starfield is just because something has flaws doesn't mean it can't be fun. And that about does it for this video, guys. I just wanted to come on here and talk about Starfield and give my honest take on it. If you liked the video and want to see more, please like and subscribe. We publish brand new content on this channel every day, so there's always something new for you to watch. Thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.